My guest today is Peter Berg, a longtime leader with AERO, the Alternative Education Resource Organization that was founded by Jerry Mintz in 1989 and continues to be a pioneer in the alternative education space. Peter is the author of the book, The Tao of Teenagers, A Guide to Teen Health, Happiness, and Empowerment. He's an adjunct lecturer at Southern New Hampshire University, as well as a mental health counselor who's focused on youth empowerment. And he is also the coordinator of the annual AERO conference that is being held this year in June 21st to 23rd in Minneapolis. So, Peter Berg, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
It's great to have you here. I'm a longtime fan of your work, and obviously, I'm a huge advocate of the work that AERO does, and longtime leader in the alternative education space, really helping to activate education alternatives for families, especially learner-centered and self-directed alternatives. So, just great to have you here to talk a little bit more about AERO's history, legacy, as well as what the future holds. It's such an exciting time, I think you agree, in
Yeah.
alternative education. So let's start, Peter, if we could, with what got you interested in education generally and alternative education specifically.
Yeah, going way back, I knew even as a young child that I would be doing something in the education field. Whether it was psychology or education, direct teaching, I just knew that I was destined to do that. Even though I had thoughts of being, a Major League Baseball player, that didn't work out. So, um, but I just knew that there was something there for me. And I think how I came into alternative education is, even reflecting back on my own school experience, I struggled in grammar school because I had to sit at a desk. And I mean, I did okay. I mean, I think I was okay. I kept up with things, but I think I struggled with the formality of it. And why can't we continue learning about cells? I really like learning about cells. Why do I have to go somewhere else? Why can't I stay here and keep learning? And so I think I had that idea, just didn't know how to articulate it. And then as I got on, later in my school career, I was fortunate enough to go to a vocational high school where I was able to, learn by doing, but also do internships, paid internships. And so I think for me, I think that also just kind of opened up my eyes to like there's a different way to do this. You don't have to um, just sit at a desk all day and call that learning. And that's fine if that works for you. But I think for me and a lot of other folks who went to the high school I went to, I don't think that would have worked for them. And then as I decided to pursue teaching, I was fortunate enough to have the chair of our department, the education department, knew John Taylor Gatto.
Ah, wow.
And I don't know if he was like really good friends with him. And it's sadly, it's one of the things I never got to ask him. And this mentor of mine, has passed away. So I never really got to follow up and say, did you actually like, were you friends with him or is it just somebody you knew? And actually, John came to one of our classes to speak. And for those who out there who may not know who
Mm.
John Taylor Gatto unfortunately, John has passed away as well. He was what I would say a very innovative, responsible, subversive New York City public school educator for I think it was about 30 years. I think he won Teacher of the Year a couple of times. He has, I don't even know how many books that he wrote that were really influential to me. And I think it was just the idea that he had that it didn't have to be the way that it was. I mean, he took kids outside, he took them to internships. He did that kind of, he explored those ideas. And I think later on his writings and the things that he spoke about was a little bit more about how the structure of the public school system really wasn't working. And I would say that's putting it mildly. But I think that really started my, kind of thinking about it differently. I think again, the chair of our department was also open to those kinds of things and looking at different ways to do things. So I think um it was there. And then, as a lot of you probably know, you have to do student teaching in order to get your teaching certificate. And so I'm doing student teaching. I'm about a month and a half into it. And this is actually an alternative program in a high school in New York City. And the lead teacher all of a sudden had a medical issue and was going to be out for the rest of the year. And
Mm.
so the principal calls me in and says, "It's your class now." And I'm like, "What?" Really? Okay. It's my class. What am I supposed to do? I'm just a student teacher. Don't worry, we'll work it out with your university. Okay. All right. So what does that look like? What do I do? And I think from that really cemented the idea to me that relationships were, way more important than what you had content wise, at least for this particular group of students. And so I think in that, it just really showed me that there were, different ways to do things. I did spend about 9 years as a New York City public school teacher, and that was kind of more conventional, and but definitely pushing the envelope and doing things, that were, I would say, that were, at least progressive for the time. And then from there, it just really opened up my journey to working with, everything from, our charter school to really unschooling environments. I was also, using air quotes here, the principal of a democratic school, which means I got only one vote like everybody else. And so I think there was just kind of that journey there that just kind of happened along the way. And I don't know that I ever really mapped it out or really thought about what it would look like or where I would end up. I had spent some time in Arizona and Los Angeles, helping schools get started and, working on various actual programming. So I think it just kind of where things sort of took me. And then connecting with AERO, back, I don't even, it's been a long time now since I've been connected with AERO. Um, and I was at the first AERO conference,
Oh, wow.
which we're in our 21st year, I think, of the AERO conference. So I was there as a participant, not yet doing any organizing or anything like that, but I was there at the first one, and it was, again, just that community of people that you meet and seeing the possibilities, hearing the amazing stories, and also hearing from people who, told their story about how things really didn't work and weren't working for their child, or if it was a young person, they were telling their story. And I think that just, I don't think I could have done anything else at that point.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that you brought up John Taylor Gatto, of course, the author of several books, including Dumbing Us Down, and Compulsory Miseducation. And he also famously quit his job as a New York City public school teacher in the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal back in 1991. And the
Right.
AERO website has the full text of that resignation letter. So if you go to educationrevolution.org, which is AERO's website, you can find it there, and I can put a link in the show notes as well. So tell us what AERO is focused on. What is the mission of AERO? Since Jerry Mintz founded it back in 1989, and Jerry was on my podcast last
Yeah.
year, so I'd encourage folks to go listen to that. I'll also put a link to that show. But tell us really what you're all about.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, AERO's mission is to bring learner-directed, learner-centered education to everyone, to make it available to everyone. And that's AERO's mission. And with, off of that, there's a lot of things that we do to support that mission, but that's AERO's mission in a nutshell.
And that includes sort of the definition of alternative education, which I think you do try to keep relatively broad, but it could include, schools like established Montessori schools or Waldorf schools. It could include Sudbury model schools and democratic schools. It could include unschooling and homeschooling approaches that focus on a really child-centered strategy or philosophy. Is that fair to say that you kind of have a big tent when it comes to alternative education models?
Yeah, that is 100% fair. And that's a lot of what we do is, we strive to be that big umbrella, that big tent, that is inclusive. And, we know that there are other organizations out there that focus on specific areas, and that's great. And we support their work. And you'll see a lot in our newsletters, even on, sometimes on our website. You'll see that we are, advertising or promoting other conferences and other events, and because we think those things are really important. But really, we want to also serve as, the hub, the place where people come to, kind of understand these things, or at least make connections. I mean, we know there are other organizations doing similar work, and again, we support their work, and we want that to continue because, it's this is a big thing we're taking on. And so we need, everybody kind of in this, at least to the degree that they want to maybe understand it, but also just knowing about it. And I think even now, even though that, there's a lot of attention now on, educational alternatives, or, alternatives to the conventional model, or, however it's being approached, there is a lot of attention on it now, but there are still people who don't know, or
Mm,
who think, oh, that's only for certain people. It's not for me. It doesn't really pertain to me. I can't do that. I don't have access to that. And that isn't true. And I know a lot of your work, Carrie, is about that, highlighting that, and highlighting, entrepreneurs that are doing that and showing what's possible. And I think that's so important, because I think a lot of times what we hear is, we'll talk to people, I can't do that. I don't have the time. I don't have, I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the, well, one of the things that AERO does is we have something called the School Starters course, where we help people through that. We help them through the steps. But we also do consultations, and we actually have this event coming up here in New Hampshire, where I live now, working with, this Saturday, working with, either current educational entrepreneurs or future ones, folks who are thinking about it, but maybe don't know how to, they don't really have the articulation down yet, or they don't have the idea fully fleshed out. So those are the kinds of things that we do as well, because we know that, educational freedom and educational choice is really important. And we say, we do have people that come to us, and, they're not necessarily looking for a learner directed model, they're looking for something else.
mm,
And that's okay. We're okay with that. What we say is, as long as, the young person, the student, you know, is understanding what they're signing up for, to the degree that they can, and they understand what it is, and they understand that there's other options, and they're choosing this one, then we're okay. And that includes, if they want to go to military school, that military school, they're there for a reason, right? They they fulfill a certain niche, right? That, other schools don't. And we support that as well, as long as it is a conscious choice, right?
right. By the learner. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So great. I've talked to so many people, Peter, over the years, who really credit AERO, and especially the AERO conference, the annual conference that you host, as being a key catalyzer for their entrepreneurial efforts. People have gone on to create their own micro schools, and saw as the gateway to that alternative education space, AERO, who provided the context and the information and the resources and the encouragement, to get them off the ground. So it's just great to see that that's continuing. I'd love to hear from you, where you said you went to your first AERO conference, the very first one 21 years ago. How have you seen AERO change over these past 2 decades?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, as I was mentioning a little bit earlier, that there's now a lot more attention, and it's a lot more, I would just say, using the phrase mainstream, right, in terms of educational alternatives. So I think what we're seeing now, especially, is that we have more people who are aware, and we're having more diverse groups coming to our conference. I think back, when I remember back at the first one, it was typically people who were, I would say, they call themselves radicals, right? Whatever that means, I don't know. I never really kind of really understood that, but and maybe I'm a radical too, I don't know. But and I think it was really and it was more of a fringe kind of thing then. And, not that there weren't a lot of there weren't alternatives. I mean, we know there were, but I think in terms of people knowing about it, and I think even the idea that, hey, I can do this, I think that was a little bit more fringe then. I think what we've seen over the last 20, well, AERO's been around for 35 years. And so, but, going to from the conference for the last 21 years, what we've witnessed is that, more people you know, who are coming into it, but I think more people who are aware, but also wanting to maybe do something. And I think, back 21 years ago, that was a smaller group of people. It was more of a niche kind of thing. And you didn't have a ton of diversity. Just and when I say diverse, I mean diversity of thought, geographic diversity, and even from a financial standpoint, just, we have more diverse groups of people now coming to AERO and looking for options and trying to understand, kind of the ecosystem out there. Okay, all right, we have micro schools and we have learning pods and we have, how all those things come together and what's the right one for me. And like you mentioned, Carrie, AERO also carries, in our umbrella, Montessori, Waldorf, really anything that is, more learner directed, learner centered are the things that we support and advocate for. So yeah, I think there's just an amazing amount of change. And I think now, there's the ecosystem there of AERO, and I think even alternative education is so much richer and more diverse. And it's been incredible to watch, I would say, especially over the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I would argue it's also much more accessible, right? Alternative education is much more accessible, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that too, especially as someone who lives in New Hampshire, and you mentioned you're helping to activate more alternative education models in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is one of many states in the US that has a robust school choice program called an Education Freedom Account that works like an education savings account, providing families of certain income levels. So at this point, it's still sort of lower and middle income families in New Hampshire. Some states have universal school choice. But allowing families who want to access an alternative to a conventional district school to be able to do that with a portion of funding. How do you see the school choice landscape in contributing to accessibility of alternative education?
Yeah, I think, and like you just mentioned, legislation that is supporting that, I think is crucial. Because one of the things that we've worked with people on for I don't know how many years, and like you said, AERO's been credited with helping schools get started, and it's we don't even know the number anymore. I mean, we've kind of lost count. It's definitely in the hundreds, probably in the thousands. But we haven't really kind of tracked all that. Um, but I would say in terms of that, the accessibility and the legislation is super important because one of the main things is sustainability. And
Mm,
so what we also witnessed for a while were, people getting started and these schools getting started, and then they weren't able to sustain themselves.
mm,
So you had sort of this uptick, and then, you have students, and then all of a sudden, oh, financially we can't do this. And then that school dissolves, and then sometimes there is nowhere for those kids to go, and they wind up either back in, you know, uh, conventional public school setting, or, maybe they find something else. But so I think legislation like that is crucial because, again, that's about sustainability of these programs, and that's a key issue. Um, I think it's exciting. It's exciting that there are a lot of states now that are, doing either like what you said, something similar to here in New Hampshire, or even universal school choice, or a variation of those things. But I think what I would like to see is that the idea of the money follows the child, right? Here's this money that we have allotted for
mhm.
all these students that want to pursue education, and here you can go ahead and use this money, in the way that you think is best. And we'd really like to see now with that, we get pushed back on that sometimes. Well, how do you know if it's working, and how do you, and I think those are legitimate questions, and there's some I think viable answers to those things. Um, but it's really exciting, what we see, the landscape out there, the ecosystem. It's exciting to see these things are happening and that people have come to it through, I would say, an altruistic lens. They're looking at it as like, okay, we know we have this public school system. Okay, it's probably still going to be there. And it works for a small percentage of people, maybe, maybe there are people who still want to choose that, and that's fine. But we also know that there's an issue here that it isn't working for a large majority of students and families. So what do we do? And it's almost an obligation to say, well, we have to give choice, right? We have to be able you know, um, to empower families and students to find the fit that works for them. Because I can tell you from my experiences, and I'm sure a lot of listeners out there can relate to this, is that um, when a learner finds that right fit and they find that right environment, it is life changing. I mean, I have many stories of students coming who, came from whatever environment they came from to the environment that fit, and their personality completely changed, their outlook changed, they were seen and heard, and now they felt competent and they felt, that they were empowered to do things, and just their whole. And I've even had families come and say, this changed our life too, not just our child that's here at this school, but it's changed our family dynamic because it's alleviated a lot of the stress and the worry and the concern, which of course anybody would have if somebody's struggling that much. Um, so I just, it's super exciting. I don't know if I have predictions yet on, what's going to happen. I have hopes, but I don't know that I can predict exactly what will happen. But I hope that, we continue to see this, and I hope that state legislators get behind this and understand that this doesn't mean that it's I don't know, that students aren't going to be, I'm using air quotes, educated. They're going to be, but they're going to learn in a very different way, and it's going to be deep and personal. And I think if they can see that, if they can understand that, I think they'll be able to get behind that.
Mhm.
Um,
So it's interesting, Peter, you mentioned earlier about kind of this was a radical movement, and
mhm.
I think certainly when Jerry launched AERO in 1989, it was also definitely a radical movement, not as mainstream as it's become, and I think is going to continue to become. One of the things I'm seeing, and I'd be curious if you're seeing this too, is it seemed like in the early days of the alternative education movement, it was largely, not exclusively, but largely a sort of a politically progressive group of families and founders who gravitated to learner-centered or learner-led education. And I see that changing dramatically to be all along the political spectrum, people with all kinds of different values and viewpoints embracing learner-led or learner-centered education and developing these really innovative learning models around that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think that's the strength of what we're seeing now is that I think, I don't think this is going out on a limb making this statement that a lot of things are politically charged, nowadays. When we look at even, our conventional public school system, the school boards are right, politically charged. Everything is, a this or a that kind of thing. And but I think what we're seeing with the alternative education movement, that is, I don't know, maybe one of the only spaces left that we're talking to each other and we're having these conversations, and people from different political backgrounds, religious backgrounds, whatever, are coming together, sitting down, talking to each other and saying, hey, this isn't working for my child. Hey, this isn't working for my child. Where do we have commonality? What do we both want to see? And I think the crux of that is educational freedom, right? That a lot of, families and students, they want to be able to have choice, right? They want to be able to have this educational freedom. And I think particularly families sometimes, they want to at least have options where it aligns with their family values. And they want to at least see that to be able to access those things and not have to pay 25, $30,000 a year to do that. A lot of families just can't afford that. That's a lot, right? That's a lot to be able to have to put out, in addition to paying taxes, right? You're now paying this tuition on top of that. So, so yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's a real strength. I'm really encouraged by that. For a while, I honestly was concerned that it was almost starting to feel very exclusive.
Mm.
Um, and then it did turn. And then I think I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One is the work of AERO, but also of other organizations to recognize that and step out of sort of the bubble that was forming and being able to reach out. But I also think legislation. I think people, starting to realize it. I think COVID honestly did a lot of, turn the screws faster on this, so to speak, and enlighten people and opened up and be like, wait a minute. So there's all this stuff online
Mhm.
that I can access, right? There's all these things that I can look at. I don't have to spend 6 hours on this. I can spend as many hours as I want, and so I think that helped. I think there's just a lot of things now that are, you know, the it's really created, such a ripe time right now. And I'm excited. I agree. I mean, I think there's so many more people who are at least know about it. Maybe if it's not for them, that's okay, but they know about it, and it's not like, again, it's no longer fringe. It's no longer like, oh, that sounds crazy. It's just like it's another thing, right? It's become part of the conversations we're having. And I remember homeschooling. I remember people talking about homeschooling, 20 years ago, and how if you had a conversation with somebody about homeschooling 20 years ago, sometimes they'd be like, I don't even know what do you mean? Like, how does that, wait, somebody can learn at home? Now it's like, you say that and people at least have an idea of what it is, or at least aren't like, oh, that's crazy. I don't even want to hear about that. Right. I think the conversation is open. So yeah, I'm really, really excited. I think it's a fun time right now, and I think it's also an important time. So there's a seriousness to it as well. I mean, it's not just like, oh, this is really fun. It's also, I think, seizing the opportunity here is important, and also in a way that is going to sustain this. Uh, what sometimes is in the back of my mind is that it's kind of like, um, when something's new, like there's a new trend happening, and you see the explosion everywhere, and there's all these, you know, either organizations or businesses or whatever popping up that support that. And then that sort of kind of goes away, and then maybe there's some that still exist, but sort of that big kind of idea of sustaining this kind of goes away a little bit. Which may happen, but I think still that sustainability of being able to have those choices is really important.
Mhm. I completely agree. So many good points there. I do think COVID was definitely a catalyst. You and I and so many others
Mhm.
were doing this work well before COVID, and then the rest of the world discovered what we had already known about how learning could look very different from traditional classroom. That especially today, with so much technological advancement at our fingertips, it just makes self-directed education a no-brainer for families, and certainly families being more accepting of homeschooling and different kinds of learning arrangements. And I think a lot of that is sort of younger generation parents, right? So millennial parents that are more open to
Mhm.
experimentation and personalization and seeing the world differently. And so I'm hopeful that we're going to continue to see this momentum. But I'd love to direct people back to the AERO website, Education Revolution, which I mentioned earlier. And I do have to correct my misstatement earlier. I was talking about John Taylor Gatto and his books. I said compulsory History, Miseducation. That, of course, was written by Paul Goodman, not John Taylor Gatto. John Taylor Gatto wrote Weapons of Mass Instruction and Dumbing Us Down in the American History, Underground History of American Education. So just that's been bothering me since I said that earlier. So just wanted to clarify that for the record. But the AERO website at educationrevolution.org is a wealth of information, including information on the upcoming annual AERO conference that, again, is being held June 21st to 23rd this year in Minneapolis. And the aeroconference.org website will take you directly there, or you can go to the main AERO website. So tell us about the conference, Peter. What's in store, and what can my listeners look forward to if they use the promo code that we will have in the show notes?
Yeah. So this year we're in Minneapolis for the first time ever. Believe it or not, we've either been on one coast or the other. So we decided to go to the middle this year. We're really excited about that. Of course, Carrie, you're going to be one of our keynoters and also on a panel with some other folks as well. And, the conference is designed to do a few things. One is to really to get these ideas out there, and bring people in who maybe haven't heard this before, or maybe who have and have been at it for a really long time, but want to come and explore these ideas further and come away with some action steps that they can take. And really the big part of the conference is the networking, right? Meeting people, talking to people. And Carrie, you mentioned a little while ago how a lot of people credit AERO and the AERO conference specifically for being the catalyst for them either starting a school or an organization, or just creating these lifelong friendships, honestly, that have happened from the AERO conference, just from the networking. But really where the theme this year is why the education revolution is crucial for democracy. So AERO uses the phrase the education revolution, and I know revolution sometimes has this kind of negative kind of connotation to it, and that's not necessarily what we mean. We don't want to violently overthrow anything, but a revolution in terms of thought and ideas, and and again, talking about the choices and the models that we were talking about. And that's the idea of the education revolution, that we have policy that backs this up, that makes it accessible, that now anybody can decide, hey, I want to try this alternative, and we don't have to worry about funding for it. We can go and do this, and we can enjoy that. And if that doesn't work, there's something else that we can try. And I think that's when we say education revolution, that's what we mean. And when we say that's crucial for democracy, it's because what we've been seeing in terms of democracy and democratic process is I think when you're a product of learning in a certain way and being in a certain environment, you participate in democracy in a different way. And we've had over the years, we've had some situations that we've had to work through where people would say to us, why are you talking to those people? Because they think this. And it's like, but that's democracy, right? That's how you do it. And I think how do I say, when you're in a system that is coercive and I would even say oppressive, and maybe not even deliberately, not necessarily by the people who are in it, but that it's designed that way, the way you participate in democracy is really different. So that's what, when we were thinking about a theme, we were thinking about really the crucial things that are kind of coming together at the same time, right? It's the idea of the education revolution, and also, democracy, and what does it mean and where is it at? And so the conference is made up of, keynote sessions, panel sessions, breakout sessions. We also have what we call pop-up sessions, where people can just say, hey, I want to talk about this. And we use an app called the Whova app. And, people can, do it on there and say, hey, I'm going to have this session at this time. Let's go talk about it. Or, they can just go around and find people and do it that way. But it's, I think the AERO conference is, I mean, Carrie, you've been there a couple of times, and it's unique in the sense of, the people that we get that come. And I think it's also a nice mixture of formality and informality. And I think we tried to do that. I mean, that's deliberate in how we do it. It's again, there's a structure, but there's also a lot of flexibility in that structure. It's a laid back, very family friendly. We expect to have a lot of youth presence this year, local groups from Minneapolis and around the Minnesota area. So we're really, really looking forward to it. We're excited. It's our first time in Minneapolis, so it's new to us. So it's exciting, but also a little makes us a little kind of nervous, but also but exciting as well. And for your listeners, we are going to offer $125 off the regular conference price. And like Carrie said, that'll be in the show notes. And if anybody is still if that doesn't work and, finances are an issue, you could contact AERO directly. One of the things that AERO really strives to do is to make any of our events accessible. And we know that, sometimes, finances are a struggle or they get in the way. And so we want to make this accessible. We don't want anybody to not be able to come to our conference because they can't afford to come. So,
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And so you said that this discount will bring the registration cost down to $150.
Yes.
That'll be with the $125 off. So hopefully many of my listeners and viewers will join you and me. I'll be there too. And like you said, it's a really family-friendly, youth-friendly event. So great to see families there as well. So what is the best way, Peter, for my listeners and viewers to learn more about AERO and to follow your work and maybe even sign up for a school starter course one of these days?
Yeah. So there's a couple of ways. One is to go to the website that Carrie mentioned. We also have a newsletter. So if you go onto the website, and so just an FYI for everybody, we are in the midst of redoing our main website. We hope to have that rolled out sometime in the summer. We do have a web designer that's working on that with us currently. So it'll look a little different, come the summer. But for now, go to the website. There is a place where you can go and see the newsletter and you can sign up for the newsletter. And we do a weekly newsletter. And there's a lot of information in there. Just about just other things that are going on, in the alternative education space. And like I mentioned, we promote other events and conferences and other things that people are doing. So actually, if you have newsletter items, you can send that to us. One way you can contact me directly, and that's peter@educationrevolution.org. And you can send me anything you have for newsletter, or you just have any questions. If you have questions about the conference or school starters, or if you just want to say hello and just chat, and just talk about what's going on for you. And we do a lot of that. AERO does a lot of that. I don't even know if we call them consultations necessarily, but we talk to a lot of people just about, hey, we have this going on, what do you think? Or, hey, did you know about this? Because, as much as we have a really big network, our network is global. We don't know, there's no possible way we can know about everything that's going on, in the alternative education space. So we like to hear news as well and just what's going on with all of you.
So great. Yeah, I think that I'm glad you brought up that AERO's global. You have a large international presence, a lot of founders and schools around the world who are members of AERO and who come to the conference each year and share there. So just great that you have that broad perspective. Such an exciting time. So Peter, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast. I look forward to seeing you soon and being at the conference, and encourage my listeners and viewers to go to the show notes to click on the registration link that will give them that discount. So again, Peter, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon.